Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. We are, we got lots to talk about. I'm very excited. We got Alan back. We got Matt here. Always a good day. Now, while I'm excited, y'all should be excited too. Like the show, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell, all that good stuff so you get your emails in the morning whenever we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, we are going to be talking about, actually, before I get that, if you have any questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put them up in the comment section. Kind of like this one. Salty jumped in here even before I did. Good day, all. To both Winterstorm and Chris. Good to see you, man. Always, I like this little race. Everybody trying to get in early. It's fun. So now we are going to be talking about being a good citizen. What does that even mean? But before we get into it, let's get some intros again. So, Alan, it's been a little while. Can you give us a quick 10 to 15-second rundown who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff?
Sure. I'm a 35-year veteran of the U.S. Army. Did 17 years in the Special Operations Aviation Regiment as a Chinook flight lead, and I retired back in 2016. And now I work as a Deputy Commissioner of Emergency Services for Orange County, New York, which is near West Point.
Bam. Just like that. I like it. It's quite the resume, too. Just like, oh, yeah, 30 some odd years. No big deal. It's awesome. So, today, like I said, we're going to be getting into what is a good citizen. So, I'm going to give a quick little blurb as to what I've been able to look up and get some research, and then we'll take it around the table. So, a good citizen is someone who actively participates in their community and upholds certain responsibilities and values that contribute to the well being of society. While the specific attributes of a good citizen can vary from one society to another, there are some common characteristics that are generally associated with being a good citizen. These include civic responsibility, respect for laws and authority, volunteering and community involvement, environmental responsibility, tolerance, civic education, and the list continues. There's a whole bunch here. So I don't want to give away too much, I guess. Let's go around the table and see what your guys' thoughts are. When I say what is a good citizen, what are your first thoughts? Alan, I'm going to come to you first. What are you thinking?
Oh, I didn't get a chance to even formulate an idea there. I guess to me, being a good citizen is, society is just a group of people that have decided to follow a certain set of rules, and somebody that follows those rules, good spirited, to me seems to be a good citizen.
Absolutely. Matt, what are your first thoughts?
No, I like how Alan put that. It's yeah, we're all part of the same collective, uh, pun intended. Um, and by everyone following the same rules and having the same motivations for success, that kind of puts everything together. And if you're not part of that, you're not part of that collective making everything go forward for success, then you're on your own path somewhere else, not part of the collective.
Interesting. Shaun, first thoughts?
Well, I had none, but one of my jobs is to stir the pot a little bit. So I'll say this that the first thing that comes to mind is, well, do you even deserve to be a citizen? So let's go back to the Roman Empire as an example, and I'm a bit tongue in cheek on this. I mean, obviously, in our modern times, everyone deserves to be a citizen, but now hop in the hot tub time machine and go back to the Roman Empire, and at one point, you just didn't get born and become a citizen, and you get to do whatever you want as a citizen. You earned your right to become a citizen in some cases. And so a long, long time ago, you had to earn your way just to become a citizen. And then once you were a citizen, perhaps you could elevate your status to be a good citizen. So that's my first thoughts.
That's going to take us down an interesting route. Alan, what do you think on that?
Yeah, along those lines with a more modern flair. You remember the movie Starship Troopers with
Yes,
the big
indeed.
spiders and all that?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Well, the movie was kind of campy, but the book itself is considered a good study on citizenship. Like, what Sean was saying, you had to earn your citizenship, which, maybe some people today kind of take that for granted. I mean, we have people who are non-citizens here in the United States that seem to think they're going to have the rights that a U.S. citizen gets, and they can have those if they become a citizen, and there's always a path for that. But yet we have, cities and states here in America that would like non-residents, non-citizens to vote in elections, which I have a hard time with since they're not U.S. citizens.
That is a great movie. I enjoyed it quite a lot. But the book is, you're right, 100% better, and it really dives into like not only an understanding of the citizenship portion, but of different political spectrum that we're not going to dive into too much. But Matt, what are you thinking on what Shaun said?
Nothing, because he literally stole my thunder. Between him and Alan, I was going to go down the Starship Trooper route, but no, we're all good. No, I agree. Like, it's the whole difference between being a civilian and a citizen, right? The civilian being the person who's not in service, but then the citizen is one who actually is part of the governing entity, right? And what Alan was saying about certain civilians seeking rights as citizens in America, I kind of agree with that too. I honestly think that if we did more service to the country as individuals, as citizens, to become civilians, that it would actually have a more better, like a greater collective of people that would actually help run the country.
It's an interesting thought. Shaun, you got anything to add?
Well, I do love when coincidence occurs. So I suck at social media and I don't even know how to pin things up and all of that good stuff. But on my Instagram account, I was getting asked so many times, Shaun, can you recommend a book? Can you recommend a book? Can you recommend a book? And I think it's great now that here on the collective we have guests where we ask them to recommend their books so that I don't have to keep saying these top 5 books that I prefer. And so I had to just pull this off of my Instagram account, and I'm just going to read it to you. I'm not going to read the verbiage of someone asking me yet again for, could you list off your books that I should maybe consider reading? So I'll go book for book. My top 5, well, that's a tough one. First ones that come to mind is Building the Elite has a great book. It's mandatory reading, and also follow them on Instagram account. Anything by Miyamoto Musashi. Anything by Jocko Willink. The Mission, The Men, and Me by Pete Blaber. And the last book, Starship Troopers, because it makes me think. And now, it's not that it just makes me think. I've been reading that book since I was a kid, and I've read it countless times. It's my favorite book on my bookshelf, perhaps. It's dog-eared and kind of beaten up, but what it speaks to me about is you have to earn your way in life. I think if anyone is privileged enough to be born in a country that they have opportunity and are surrounded by affluence and surrounded by good leadership and are surrounded by good citizens, well, congratulations, you won the birth lottery. But not everyone gets to win that lottery. But a lot of people take for granted the fact that they were born in a country that sets them up for success. Well, that isn't common throughout the entire planet. And so I think people not disrespect, but take for granted their citizenship, their citizenry. Whereas I feel, just like Starship Troopers, you have to earn your right to be a citizen. You have to earn your way in life. And it should not come without a cost. It should not be a case of you simply take a number and now you're a citizen. I think you have to earn your way in the lineup to be able to take that number and then become a citizen. So Starship Troopers for me is a book that I regularly ask people to read and think about, not just read, think about what it means to you and how it can not just make you a better person, but make you a better citizen.
Oh, interesting. Now, the question I have is around that is, I think the issue that I guess maybe I'm struggling with is the difference between rights and I guess the word would be, I can't think of the word right now, but like gifts, like the things that you have to earn versus the things that you innately have, right? And drawing a line between what is innate that like freedom, which I believe should be innate, might not be as you you may not be as free if you're not a citizen versus being a civilian, if that makes sense. So by limiting what your capabilities are initially without earning anything, how do you then create a society that wants to earn stuff? If that makes sense. You guys tracking what I'm getting on here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things, if I'm interrupting you here, stop me. But one of the things I'd like to see is some type of compulsory national service. Not necessarily the military, because here in the U.S. the volunteer military has actually worked out quite well compared. I joined the Army shortly after the draft ended, and there were plenty of people still serving that had been drafted, and some of those problems that came with the draft were still there when I first started. And it was nice to see the military professionalize over the course of time. But what I would like to see is, was it Colin Powell had this thing, AmeriCorps, where, young people could, go out and do things like, go out to Appalachia and rebuild towns that have been destroyed after the coal mines closed, or, go into the inner cities and help clean things up, and, whatever it's going to be, but something that's for the good of society. And I think if you do that for a period of time, not only should they pay you, give you medical, but that's almost like the military. They ought to be able to give you, free college, and it doesn't have to be, some Ivy League thing. It could be a community college, but it's free. There's, everybody's like, oh, you can't get to college. It's too expensive. Oh yeah. Join the Army for 4 years and see what happens. That's how I got my degree. So
That's a great point. Matt, you got any thoughts?
No, I know we're kind of going down the political route, and this one's kind of the topic, but no, I agree too as well, that there should be some form of service. And again, not military, could be emergency services, could be police, could be, even just, I'm going to say national help everyone out fund or something, right? I think that would, again, that comes back to my other point, where I think that would make better people in a better society as a whole.
Mm. Now, Shaun, you got any thoughts on that one before I jump in?
Yeah. How do you value anything if it has no cost? I think there should be a small price or a large price, whatever price. If someone gives me something for free, I don't value it as much if, as compared to if there is a price to be paid for that thing that I get. And I mean, typically blood, sweat, and tears is what helps me value something a little bit more. When we went over to Norway for a month when I was very early in my military career, working with the Norwegian Army, the Norwegian population at the time, and I'm not sure if it's still the case, as young men and women, you had a choice to make. You either became a conscript in the Norwegian Army and served for a year, or for lack of a better term, you became a conscript within the public service, and you served in some capacity to serve your fellow citizens, which hopefully had preceded you by doing the exact same thing. And so generation after generation or year after year, the citizenry not only supports itself, but also understands that everyone understands the cost to be citizens within the citizenry. And so I can't even explain how strongly I feel about if you are born in a country and think that you are automatically granted rights and responsibilities that have been hard earned, and then you disrespect those rights and responsibilities because you devalue them through feeling that you don't have to serve your fellow man in some small or large capacity, I really think it's the road to ruin.
Interesting. The just want to quickly touch on this. John Menard jumped in here and said, hello, Team TC, an honored guest. Good to see you, John. The question I then kind of come to, at least with this, is that it's a slippery slope, and let me say that, because the moment you start putting in compulsory components, then you're going to be bringing people into a service that is about service. So you're going to have people like we do in the volunteer military, volunteer police. You're going to have people that aren't really there for the right reasons. You're going to have people that aren't really bought into the game. They're just kind of there. And with compulsory service, I think you're going to see more of that. And you might actually create a dissent against the system because they are now being forced to do it rather than having the choice. So I'm wondering where your guys' thoughts are on that in terms of, is there a line that you can kind of bridge between compulsory versus volunteer, or is there do you think that the compulsory is kind of the end all be all? Alan, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess the way you put that made me rethink my terminology. I would call it semi-compulsory in that you're not penalized necessarily for not doing it, but you gain, the free college, the medical, things like that, that additional to what any other citizen gets now,
Interesting. Matt, thoughts? Where are you coming from?
My first thought is that there's actually countries around the world that do have compulsory service and stuff, and it works, right? They've been doing that for decades, years, right? And I think that's the key, is that they're well established within that institution as a country, that I will do my service and then now I'm a citizen, right? The compulsory and having people who are not bought into the game, I think will be something that's a generational learning point, right? First generation, yeah, okay, I don't want to do this. I'm being forced to do this, blah, let's hate everything. But I think as it successfully, and that's the key thing, it has to be successful over a couple generations, you'll actually see that people are saying, yeah, you know what, I want all those benefits, or I want to go to college. Here's a path I can take. And I want to give back to the country that's given to me. I think that is where you'd have to aim for a couple generations down the road, not just today we're doing this because I want a better tomorrow. I want a better future down the road.
I'd agree with that for sure. Shaun, thoughts? Come back to you, Shaun. What are you thinking? Are you with us?
You guys are breaking up a little bit at
Bit of a
my end.
delay.
I'm not sure if it's happened at your end. I am.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you have any thoughts on
Can you
anything?
hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Just kick back in. Do you have any thoughts on
Okay,
what Matt
good.
just said? No? Okay. We're going to
Okay,
move
can
on
you
from
hear
him.
me?
Just we can hear you fine. I guess you probably can't hear us that well. So, we'll try and sort that out in a second. I'm going to come back to you, Shaun, here in a minute. But the question that I have outside of this is then, how do we prevent it from being skewed or disturbed? So, like in Starship Troopers, it's an excellent look at how a fascist society can be run. In terms of there is compulsory service, there is only one particular political style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have to serve in order to become a citizen, and only the citizens can vote. How would we create something like that, let's say, but prevent it from being misused? I guess, Matt, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Well, I think in the book they all had the common threat, right? The aliens coming in, it was Earth versus the aliens, but it's the commonality, which was something that they were all focused on one path, right? And I think that's what would have to happen, but we don't have we don't have aliens attacking us yet, right? Who knows? It may start after the collective. We'll see. But we need to, as people, as citizens, as globally, whatever, we need to have a single path forward to actually be focused into this. And I don't know, climate maybe might be a target that we can aim for. I don't want to go down that road at all because you got, feelings on that. But something that everyone is on the same path, same goal, same oriented, should be able to make sure that it doesn't skew all over the place and turn into something that it's not supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. What are you thinking?
No, I agree. What I said earlier about society just being a bunch of people that have agreed to live together under certain sets of rules, if you will, whether that's a neighborhood, a state, a country, a world, you just have to, the first part is you just have to follow the rules, and enforce those rules. And there has to be some, punishment for not following them, to whatever degree the group agrees to, or, success for, being the lead on some of these things, and so there's got to be the carrot and the stick. But the big thing is everybody's just got to kind of get along. So if people were just a little nicer to each other, a little golden rule kind of thing, maybe it's easier to follow those agreed upon rules or statutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, were you able to? Can you hear us now?
No, I had to bounce out and reboot this goofy little router here down in Australia. So I did miss some of it, but I think based on what I hear from Alan, I think that there has to be a carrot and a stick. And I don't think that the carrot and the stick has to be extreme, but there just has to be a balance. There has to be measures in place that correct the citizenry in the citizenry agreed trajectory. And so that means it's not one individual that just walks across the hill and says, I now rule the entire citizenry and it's going to be my way or the highway and I've got a big stick. It has to be a citizenry approved or citizenry evaluated general course of action as the citizenry moves into the future. And so I think the rules that are set in place have to be firm enough that it shapes the citizenry in the agreed upon citizenry direction. And so what came to mind before I had to bounce was, I forget the period of time in Rome. Caligula is the period, I do believe, where a part of the citizenry just basically lost its mind by excess, by overconsumption, by all the wine, by all the food, by all the orgies. And so Caligula is a expression, I feel, of how it can go terribly wrong by having too much freedom to some degree. And so can you ever have too much freedom? Well, in that case, there was. And that's because it was not enough checks and balances in that period of time. Our planet evolves through the centuries, and at one point we were barbarian hordes that they too considered themselves as a citizenry. But who wants to go back to the barbarian hordes times? Not me. And so I appreciate our modern society. What I don't appreciate is how we're kind of losing our way on freedom is so free that there's no respect for freedom.
That is a good point. Matt, you got some thoughts?
No, I like the last line that Shaun said. That was pretty much on point. People are taking too much advantage of their freedom right now that they can't even see that it was a cost. And from not by those individuals in the freedom at the moment, but by people previous generations.
Yeah, I was thinking the decadent period of Rome, right, is where the citizenry no longer had to serve in the military. They were able to buy it off to or pass it off to other people, and they were the they were allowed to proxy, as we were talking yesterday. They were allowed to proxy their service out to somebody else just through having money. So yeah, I struggle with this whole concept of being what a good citizen is, because it really varies based on the culture that you come from, right? Because at the time in the Roman period, being a good citizen meant being as absolutely decadent as you could possibly be. That was the game at a certain time. But prior to that, the game was serve the greater good, right? You serve in the military, you pay into the government, you do all these things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, as much as we don't want to have a heavy hand in terms of these are the rules, there's a point where you have to have a bit of a heavy hand. And I think of traffic in this point as a great allegory, is that we're all following the same rules. We're all driving around doing the same things. It's the outliers that stand out, right? The people that speed excessively, the people that weave through traffic, blah, blah, blah. Now, we don't want people wandering around being vigilantes and holding the standards for everybody, but at the same time, we kind of do. What do you guys think on that, Alan?
I think that's a great analogy. I can't disagree with it.
Matt, any thoughts?
I'm still kind of wrapping my head around the whole vigilante thing and going out there and get off the street, you're not right. But no, I kind of agree with you in that regard, where the, when everything was working together, it became so strong and so prosperous that they started to slack off. And like you're saying, like giving off the armed forces proxies and giving off responsibilities, and it wasn't the whole greater good thing. And then you could see the collapse from that too as well. So it's an interesting perspective to seeing that something like that was successful and everyone was a citizen going for the ruling of a collective, and then all of a sudden off the cliff out of pure
Shaun.
desire.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, thoughts?
Going back to a good citizen, I think, when you're in junior high or senior high in high school, in front of you is a course that's laid out that you can understand and action against and then be evaluated against, and you kind of operate within a structure that helps you understand if you're doing things well or not. So either you pass grade 10 or you don't. So there are simple institutions around all of us all the time where there's fairly clear guidelines on what it means to be a good grade 10 student or not. But when's the last time anyone ever looked up the definition of a good citizen in the book called A Good Citizen? I don't think it really exists. I know down in the United States, there is a constitution that acts as a framework for the country, for the citizenry, I suppose. And that was written quite some time ago, and I'm not sure if it's as relevant today as it was back then, but it definitely acts as a founding document to help people understand what is appropriate for the citizenry as agreed upon by the citizenry. But though it stands as a founding document, I'm not sure if it's as well understood now as it was well understood back then. And so is it relevant today? I think it is. But if it has lost some of its relevancy today, it's only because it is not being described as well or not being pushed out to the society as well as it was then. So I know for sure, having lived down in the United States for a couple of years, that there are people down there who know the Constitution inside and out, and they are good citizens. And there are others that know there's a thing called the Constitution because they heard about it when they were failing in grade 10, and they are not subscribing to the Constitution. They are a citizen, but they are not a good citizen because they've never taken the time to consider what a good citizen is through the documentation that is right in front of their nose, that is being agreed upon by the citizenry within the United States. So my point would be this, that it would be nice if there was just a simple one-pager that could be handed out to the entire world that is titled, What is a Good Citizen? I know there's a book called Starship Troopers, but it's a long read. And so maybe just a one-pager that we could photocopy and hand out would be nice. And I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it makes my point because I know people who couldn't spell citizen, never mind what it means to be a good citizen. And that, by not being able to spell citizen, is a glaring example of how, as citizens, we've let down our fellow citizens to help them achieve the standards that we expect in today's modern society.
That's very interesting. Alan, got any thoughts on that?
I can't top that. Yeah, the one pager is, the big thing is, here in the United States, the education system is certainly, in my opinion, failing to teach, proper civics. When I was a kid, we had a cartoon on Saturday morning called Schoolhouse Rock. And it was like a little short, I don't know, 2-3 minutes of little jingles that taught you how a bill became a law, for example. there are people now that don't understand how that works. And, kids, 8 years old, back in the 70s could tell you, I'm just a bill on Capitol
I
Hill.
remember watching that.
But yeah, I mean, you gotta, I personally thought, a couple months ago, I was thinking, there ought to be some kind of classes on, here in the United States in particular about, life, how to, budget your money, how to pay a mortgage, how to get a loan, how to, all this kind of stuff, how to change a tire, all the basics, that no one ever teaches you until you get out of high school and you have to do it on your own. And, and then I thought, civics, you should understand who you're voting for and what you're voting for. And I saw somebody that same time frame on the television that said the same thing, and everybody jumped on him. It was like, civics, you can't teach civics. That's a problem. And I was like, "Oh, shit, I didn't think that was a big deal." But my opinion is that the education system is where it has to start.
I really like that because I do remember, and there was actually here in Canada, there was a, I don't know if you guys, if Sean or Matt, if you remember this, there used to be a robot commercial every once in a while that would like jump around through a bunch of gears and then he'd lose his arm and then he'd pick it up and put it back on and he goes, well, I can put my arm back on, but you can't. Remember to play safe, that kind of stuff. And it was just all those little lessons, right? And they were little, even cartoons at the end used to have morals, right? They'd have the GI Joe at the end of the show would sit there and be like, "Listen up, kids. Remember, knowledge is half the battle." That kind of stuff. Just little pieces of civics. I guess we don't really see that because we have on-demand stuff now. Do you think that perhaps is the catalyst where you start being able to get anything at any point? Once that happens, then you start to lose the way, I guess, a little bit. Sean, I'm going to come to you first on that one. What do you think?
Well, to your point, there is a lot of information out there. And some of that information is provided by people who can't spell citizenry. And so if there are citizens thinking that citizenry is spelt with an S instead of a Z, it's a fine example of a much broader and deeper conversation that we could go into in respect to why someone doesn't know that there's a thing called the Constitution in the United States. And I would suggest it's irrespective of whether they were born in the country or born outside of the country. It is the country's job to help the citizenry understand what the bare bone basic expectations of them are as citizens. I think where it goes wrong is that the citizenry starts to create its own citizenry within the citizenry. And now we have a siloized effort to educate people that are being poorly educated by either their peers or their mentors or their figureheads that are leading the citizenry astray because they never ever understood what it meant to be a citizen. By being born doesn't mean that you can stand on a soapbox and spout to the masses what it means to be a citizen. You have to earn your right, I feel, just like Starship Troopers. You have to earn your right to become a citizen who guides fellow citizens.
Interesting, Matt. You got any thoughts on that?
Um, I think because there is such a global information exchange now through internet, through accessible travel, and just the whole global communication that we're having, that there is a saturation of different styles and different types of citizenship in being a civilian and stuff too. And I think that dilution kind of creates a little bit of confusion too, where individuals from one country who's following a certain civilian path is seeing it from also sees a different path and tries to integrate it into their current citizenry, right? Example, like U.S. has certain policies, but Australia has certain policies, right? And if an Australian comes to United States is like, hey, I want to follow being American, they will bring some of those cultural traits and those acts of citizenry with them by default. Like they can't just all instantly remove it from themselves, and that's where you start getting that delusion, not dilution of your different styles of citizenry.
Alan? Any thoughts on that?
Really, I guess the thing I think of the most is the ability to get accurate information. So it may be, at your fingertips, but is it correct? Is it valid? And I personally am having a hard time selecting news sources, for example, or information sources that are accurate. And so if you're trying to base your decisions on, how you're going to behave this way or that way, based on what's going on in the world or your community, you know, accurate information is how you're going to get a good decision out of that. Otherwise, it's the old garbage in, garbage out situation.
Hmm. I have a little bit of a thought on this, and that, like, we used to have, as different societies, I mean, they're still out there, is rites of passage, right? There was certain things that you needed to be able to do or go through in order to become part of the tribe or part of the community or part of the things like that. And I think that perhaps school kind of got turned into that concept where you have to go through your schooling and you do all your programming and you get through all your things to then come out being a citizen. But I think maybe perhaps it's changed so much. I was thinking, Alan, when you went to school, did you have to cite the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning and do the whole standing up for the anthem every morning and so on and so forth?
We did.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, because I don't think that happens anymore, right? I know in Canada there's certain schools that don't even sing the anthem in the morning, that kind of stuff. So can you enlighten us, I guess, a little bit on the U.S.? I don't know if you
I
know
think
more than me.
as far as schools go, I'm not sure. All my kids are growing up with their own kids, so I don't really know about that. But I do know that many of the functions that I attend, because I'm a public official, the pledge is what begins every meeting. I know the first time I heard that, I thought it was funny. It was like, wow, hey, they're doing this, right? And then it stayed going on. And funny story. My the county executive that I work for uh, is also a naval reservist, and he was up in front of a crowd presenting something, and they started with a pledge, and a guy in the front row decided not to stand for the pledge, which is his prerogative. But the county executive kind of looks at him and goes, "Excuse me, are you going to stand for the pledge?" And the guy says, "No." And then they start going at it a little bit, and they fine, let's take this outside. So this is the the county executive is pretty high up in the community, and this guy follows him out, and just before they get to the door, he tries to clock him in the back of the head, and take a cheap shot at him. But the security guard happened to put a little arm bar on him. But it was just funny to see something along those lines at that level.
That's an interesting look at the accountability portion of it too, right? If you're talking about holding citizens accountable to each other by stepping outside, that's one way to do it, right? Well, let's go settle this and we'll talk about it outside, right? I'm wondering. It's an interesting concept, though. Shaun, you got any thoughts on it at all?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that all day long, but I'm gonna maybe mention that I was born in the United Kingdom, and we moved to Canada when I was 10, and I became a Canadian citizen when I was about 16 years of age. And in order to become a Canadian citizen, there was an exam, or there was a test that you had to write. So you had to be up on your facts and figures, the history of Canada and what it means to be a Canadian citizen, what Canada represents, and so on and so forth. And you know what? I took it serious, man. And the moment that I, quote unquote, passed my test and then I became a Canadian citizen, I was read into Canada by the officiating member. And that moment to me spoke to my commitment to Canada. And that then led to a life of service. And so the trajectory, as I look back on it, the simple trajectory was I was not a Canadian citizen. I became a Canadian citizen. And through that process, I learned how to serve my fellow Canadian citizens. But it was through a structure. it was through a pipeline of controlled understanding that in order to be this, you have to do that. And so it goes back to my earlier comments on if you're simply born and exist in a country, you're not a citizen until you act as a citizen. And whatever that means to that person is determined by what country they're born in through a communal recognition or understanding or agreement that when you're born here and you exist here, you will act accordingly and you will be held accountable. Otherwise, it's anarchy. And I mean, I don't want to like get all crazy and say that if you don't follow the rules, that the wheels are going to come off the bus and the whole planet is going to melt down. But we're one step away from the barbarian hordes unless we subscribe to the generally agreed upon rules of how to operate as a cohesive citizenry in whatever part of the world you're in.
Interesting. It goes back to the standard is the standard, right? You set a standard and then that is it. Matt, you got any thoughts on that?
It's kind of going back to Alan's point. I think that his accountability story there, I think that's something we've lost as citizens in a civilian kind of relationship, is that people do not stand up for what needs to be as citizen, right? Like here in Canada, saying the national anthem in school is kind of full foreboding right now, right? Like it's, ooh, you can't sing national anthem here. In certain places, flying Canadian flags is now seen as maybe different than it was a decade ago. So I think we've got away from it, and a lot of people have just let things slide, and that's that's the downfall. That's where things are starting to fall apart, is when we're actually not keeping people accountable for being citizens within their country or whatever. Yeah. It's sad to see the decline, but I think it's not impossible to regain back to where it was.
I'm thinking, I'm wondering more about this is the fact that the the concept of like the melting pot, basically. You know, the U.S.'s design is to have people come in from all over the world, become Americans, but at the same time mix cultures throughout, right? So you have now an integration from, as you were saying earlier, Matt, from somebody from Australia comes in, whether it be to Canada or to the U.S., they're going to bring some of their idiosyncrasies, even if they buy wholehearted into it, right? Like, Shaun, when you took your test and you were like, yes, I'm a Canadian now, but you still had the the habits that you'd built in England that you were then having to slowly adjust, but also those were affecting the people around you as well. So I guess the question is, how do we maintain a standard and maintain the influx of new information? It's going to be a tough one, Alan. What do you think?
I like the idea of the melting pot. It, where else are you going to get Chinese food, right? If you go to China, do they have Chinese food? No, they have food. But when New York City, for example, is not far from here, about 50 miles, and I love to go there and just enjoy as you walk around or go around the city, the different cultures that are just immersed in that. And when somebody tries to, the extremes are what the problem is in any of this, whether it's one side or the other. But I love the idea of people coming here legally and bringing their lifestyles with them and their culture, their food, their ideas. I mean, that's how we stay fresh, I think.
Matt, any thoughts?
No, I'm on the same boat with the melting pot. I like it, but I do think that there has to be. I think maybe Alan kind of mentioned just when we're like legally coming into the country, like what makes it legal to come into the country, be part of that, a citizen in that country. I think that aspect is needed too for your melting pot to be successful. I love the fact that I learn cultures and different languages from other people, or experience this and that from other cultures. But I also think that if you're want to be part of that country, that you have to be part of the country, not just a guest imposing your will.
Interesting, Shaun. Thoughts?
Well, I too love diversity. In fact, tomorrow we're flying to Malaysia for a month, and we chose Malaysia specifically because it's considered universally as the most diverse country in Southeast Asia. And so, how can you understand diversity if you never leave your town in the middle of Nowheresville? I mean, how do you understand diversity if you never go seek it? If your baseline is simply your neighbor who looks exactly like you, eats exactly like you, speaks exactly like you, and thinks exactly like you, that isn't diversity. So you have to go out and be a citizen within the world to understand what a citizen means in your country, I feel. And so the idea of a melting pot, I feel, is the best form of citizenry. However, the slippery slope is when a melting pot, we'll say it's a country, then starts dividing itself into silos of citizenry within the citizenry. And then it becomes entrenched and dogmatic and it pulls into itself rather than viewing outside of itself. That is the opposite of diversity. That is an invasive species that is distorting the idea of a communal citizenry. A melting pot is a beautiful thing, except when an invasive species hops into it and starts tearing things apart from the inside from its controlled silo of nonsense. We all have to get along. We're talking about extremes to some degree because they help make the point. But our planet is being torn apart right now by divisiveness, by the siloized understanding of we're going to look after us and we don't care about you. These little silos that are starting to form up and creating divisiveness is the opposite of a melting point. So we could all be in a melting point, right? Or sorry, in a planet that is, yeah, a melting pot. We could all be on a planet that's called a melting pot that could be a beautiful thing, except when a silo is created that refuses to get along with the melting pot.
Alan, you got any thoughts on that?
Can't disagree.
Matt, anything at all?
So I guess the question would then be like, I'm going to use like gardens in the weed. We make a garden where everyone and everything in that garden is growing for a certain purpose. Citizens, civilians are all working for the same purpose. But then we have weeds. And as a good gardener, how do we remove those weeds so that the garden can grow?
That is a dang good question. I'm going to come back to you, Alan. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, really about the rules, following the rules, enforcing the rules. So the weeds are those outliers that are not following the established guidelines everybody else agreed to. So instead of getting your cucumber, you get some poison ivy. Very unpleasant. You're not going to eat it. It serves no real purpose, and you're going to have to eradicate it. Somehow.
Shaun, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a time to pull weeds, but there's also a time to figure out how to use weeds. And so if you have a cohesive garden, there's a place for weeds in it because maybe those weeds attract honeybees. I don't know. I'm going to make up stuff. I'm not a gardener. I can barely grow tomatoes. And so I think if you have a natural garden in front of you called a melting pot, there's a place in the garden for everything. Where it goes wrong is where the weeds, the thorny poison ivy or thistles or whatever the case is, when they start growing to a degree where it is overwhelming the lettuce or the tomatoes. You can't go and pick a tomato because you're going to get poked by a thorn. And so I think weeds can naturally exist within a healthy garden as long as they don't overgrow their place.
these are a lot of really interesting allegories. Like, I kind of want to play with this a little bit, but so the idea of weeding, then you could relate that to like policing or military work, something like that, where you have to have some sort of barrier to keep the weeds from taking over. Now, the funny thing is then the how do we, I mean, we have kind of politically determined how to make these rules and all these things, which is we all agree upon. But how do we get young people who are coming up right now, to become good citizens? How do we get them to be lettuce and tomatoes rather than more weeds that we have to deal with? Matt, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I think it's education, personally. I think we have to, I'm not going to say force it down people's throats because that's the wrong way to do it too as well, but it has to be more open about what a civilian and a citizen and what the country you're in stands for. I totally disagree with removing any aspect from education, any aspect of that from education, like it has been in the past. I think we should be, knowing where our country come from, what we stand for, and how we're planning to move forward. I think that should be on everyone's mindset, and not to get too tyrannical, I guess, but if everyone has that in mind and everyone knows where we are actually going, I think that would create a more cohesive garden, I guess. And then the weeds would have a place. The weeds would know, hey, yeah, like the garden's growing this way. I should be going that way too if I want to succeed in success and live and grow and all that good stuff. I have like a lot of like ideas politically and stuff like that, but I'm not going to get into it. But what I do see, just like keep an eye on the news and stuff and other sources, is that there is that diversity right now where there's no real focus forward. It's kind of like, well, this and this, and we're arguing this, and you're not moving. You're just kind of like spreading out.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to get away from the garden for a minute here. Get out on the water. Rowing a boat. All in the same direction. Coordinated. With a coxswain saying, stroke, stroke, stroke. I mean, the efficiency, the fact that you don't have somebody going opposite direction, and then the boat just kind of goes in a circle or nowhere at all. That's society, really.
Yeah,
We got to all row in the same direction.
That's a great allegory, Shaun. Anything to add?
Well, I suppose if we're a boat right now, there's a hole in the boat.
Yes.
And so, and who's putting their finger in the hole to stop the leak? And every time someone puts another finger in the hole, there's another hole. And like the boat is sinking to some degree based on all of the oars on either side of the boat not working together. The lack of direction, the lack of cohesive action, the lack of trying to get off the water back to the land to safety while all the holes are springing up in the boat is mind-boggling. And I think that really, simply for me, and I might be wrong, I think that everyone in society holds an oar, but I think that a lot of people consider that oar as theirs to do whatever they want with, rather than that oar is there for you to work with us as a country to move in the direction that we all agree upon before our boat sinks.
And I agree with you. That's a great way to put it. Now, in terms of leadership, because that's what gets us where we want to go, right? Like if we have a goal, it's going to be a leader that takes us there at some point, because it's either going to be yourself leading the way or it's going to be somebody else leading the way or whatever. But I try to turn this towards myself on this, and how do we as leaders, as good citizens, tell people to utilize the oar better, right? Like, how do we? I mean, we can demonstrate through example, but it almost feels like we're on the opposite side of the spectrum a little bit. So like, it's not a balanced amount of people that are good citizens versus good citizens. I don't know how else to put that, but it feels like the scales are tipped a little bit. in the favor of the weed or the non-rower or whatever allegory we want to use. So how do we tip the scales back in our favor? Matt, what do you think?
I think the weeds get attention because they're causing noise. They're causing problems for the garden. And the nice vegetables and the tomatoes and the lettuce, or they're nice. They're doing their thing by themselves, and they don't get that attention, right? So I think we need to tell our gardener, hey, we need your attention too. Like, stop looking at the weeds all the time and start looking at us as actual citizens and civilians and people who actually care for the country more than the other people. I think it just, like, there's so much noise on media about the bad and the people uprising and blah blah blah, but there's no noise about the people who are actually standing for their country or standing to be good citizens.
That's a great point. Alan, any thoughts?
Yeah, good news. Good news is not something you normally see on the news programs, right? If it leads, it bleeds, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Shaun, you got any thoughts?
No, I think we are on point in the sense of the only way to move things forward is through leadership by example. And maybe I'm going to stir the pot a little bit, but I feel that leadership by example is best done at the grassroots level rather than at the highest of levels, whatever that means to anyone out there. So I'll craft a generic country that has a generic prime minister, president, or leader, or whatever. That to me is the worst level of leadership because it's a sole person or an individual who has a voice that can, not arbitrarily, but can in a instance or in a moment shift the calibration of the generic country to a degree where it ripples on down to the common man on the street in a way that negatively impacts them, that is out of their control. Whereas from the grassroots level up of leadership, the impact of a single man on the street telling their neighbor, hey man, you know what? Could you clean up all the garbage on your front lawn? And I'd appreciate that, thanks. That isn't going to change the country in a heartbeat in the wrong direction. What it might do is have a tiny little blip of an effect in your neighborhood, but it's not affecting the town across the way. It's not affecting the neighbor down the street who doesn't hear that conversation. What it does do is it just changes things a tiny, tiny bit in a more positive direction. So I feel that when we talk about leadership or leadership by example, I think the world's got it flippity-flopped. We focus on high leadership or the highest of high levels of leadership that sometimes is doing it wrong, because humans do things wrong. But at the lowest or the street level of leadership, even if you do it wrong in the moment, even if you yell at your neighbor or you don't yell loud enough or you wave as you're driving by and the garbage is still on the lawn, it's not going to impact the entire country in a split second. And so for me, leadership by example is about grassroots level doing it right and making a better country at a strong foundational level through like a constitution that everyone agrees upon and acts accordingly at a street level, waves to their neighbor, goes and helps pick up the garbage, rather than at a different level where someone's yelling down at the masses and taking the country from here to there in a minute. I hope that makes sense.
That is a very interesting point. It actually goes to this. Steve jumped in here with a comment just a second ago. He said, just such a great and important topic, get it collective. But then he adds in here, the youth are alarmingly quick to seek out and watch failure before success. Critical problem that detaches them from shining in the garden. I think this is kind of to what you're talking about, Shaun, is the fact that if we're focused on what is going wrong at the top, or we're focused on what isn't working, then we're not really looking at what is working. if that makes kind of sense. Am I about right there, Shaun? I'm asking you.
Well, people focus on all kinds of things. More often than not, it's the negatives rather than the positives at whatever level of leadership or citizenry. So I think it's on point. And so I suppose, I don't want to make this all kumbaya. I don't want to like sit around the campfire and hold hands and pretend that we're all getting along as citizens, because we're not. And so, we can focus on the positive all day long. That's not going to make the negative go away. So I think that there has to be a healthy balance between the two.
Absolutely. Matt, Alan, any thoughts on that?
No, I think the broader concept of what's a good citizen, is different segments, right? So one of them would be leadership, and in order to get leaders that are worth following, you have to participate in whatever the civic method of electing or selecting, that person is, whether it's, Parliament or Congress or something. But what I've noticed in the last several years is that the local governments, the smaller, lower levels of government, the village, the town, the state, they have a much larger impact on your daily life than, in our case, the president or, the prime minister or something like that. And but I think that's just a small segment. I mean, you still have to, adhere to the rules we all agreed to. You have to, maybe be a nicer person than your neighbor if you can, because it's contagious. You go, even in New York City, where people are just, they're just focused straight ahead. They're not looking for other people. But what I've found is if they ever look you in the eyes, they see you as a person. Otherwise you're just a thing. So open the door for somebody, some people will just push right through and they don't care. They won't say thank you. And others they'll meet your gaze and say thank you. And then you'll see them open the door for somebody else, and it's contagious.
Absolutely. Matt, any thoughts on that?
No, I like the last part there about it being contagious. I did a post many years ago about gratitude and sharing and caring, and if one person does it, it kind of turns into um, it grows, expands exponentially, right? And I agree with that. And that kind of goes with the whole citizenship too. If we actually start doing our citizenly duty, spelled with an S, not a Z. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Um, I think it gets contagious. I think the other people will start actually following suit and start saying, "Yeah, I'm here for the country," or "I'm here for the collective."
Yeah, absolutely. Now we are just a little bit over time. You got something, Shaun? What do you got?
I do. I got to say it because it's mandatory to the conversation. It's great. It's a feel good moment, and we can think about how by opening a door, maybe that person a day or two later or 5 minutes later will maybe open the door for someone else. But that's rarely the case. It can happen for sure. It's nice to think that it will play out that way. But I'll tell you what really does work, but it's a hard thing to do. It's called accountability. So when I hold a door open for someone and they walk through and they ignore me, you know what I do? I say, "You're welcome." And sometimes they'll carry on and they'll feel the heat. They'll know that they did wrong. They know that I just dirted them. And so sometimes they'll even have the gall and audacity to look over the shoulder with a bit of anger or resentment, or they'll start flaring out, or they'll know that they just got called out. And they'll think that they're going to, you know, correct their correction by glaring me down. Wrong, bro. That's a wrong move, because I'm going to lock gazes with you. As you're walking through that door, looking over your shoulder, I'm going to hold your eyeball long enough until you look away shamefully. That's called accountability. And so I think that we can all kumbaya the moment and hope that the world magically goes off into unicorn land and fixes itself and etc. But that ain't the case. Accountability is the case. That is literally what Starship Troopers is all about.
Yeah, it is, and I believe the they put it in the movie. I'm not sure if I remember it being the same in the book, but they said at the end was like, what makes a good citizen?" And I think Rico was like, they put the safety and the safety of the planet as their personal responsibility, something like that. But I do really love that movie. It's a great one. Now, I'm going to get some final thoughts on this just because this is a great comment, and then we'll shut her down for the day. So Salty said, too many people focused on the blame and problems while forgetting about the solutions. Do you paddle or bail out the water? And if you bail out the water, who's still paddling? I think this is a great question. So I'm going to get some final thoughts on this, and then we'll shut her down for the afternoon. Matt, coming to you first. What do you think?
No, I agree with that 100%. And like you start, if one person puts their finger in the hole and they're not rowing, that side starts being weak. Um, I also think that if the leader or of the boat doesn't tell a person that you will put your finger in the hole, but you will the next rower you will pick up his pace. I think that's what will also create an issue too.
Alan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's going to be the leader of that boat to say, okay, I'm evaluating the rate that the water is filling up and how slow we're going, and so on and so forth. But someone's got to decide, otherwise we're all swimming.
That's a great way to put it. Shaun, any final thoughts on this?
Yep, someone has to decide. That's the first step. And then someone has to execute that decision. That is the second step. And I feel that the first part is done far too much. The second part is done too rarely.
Outstanding. That is a great final thought. Now, again, I really do appreciate the conversation, guys. Alan, Matt, Shaun, always love chatting with you guys. I do love the fact that we skirted politics quite well around that whole thing. We talked about citizenry and civics without actually diving into politics. So I really do appreciate it. I think it was a great chat. We're, I guess I don't really have much to add. I would say learn, build, grow. Continue to do that every day with us here on the collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Gmo.
Chimo.